Good morning and welcome to the Utah History Podcast. I'm Holly George, one of the editors of Utah Historical Quarterly, and my guest is Kirk Huffaker, who is Executive Director of Preservation Utah. We're talking today because Kirk was a special guest editor for an issue we've done on historic preservation that will be timed with the Vernacular Architecture Forum conference that's going to be here in Salt Lake in about 3 weeks' time from when we're recording this. So, Kirk, could you describe for our listeners briefly what historic preservation is?
Sure, why not start at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
This is, I think, I want to give my own definition. I'm sure there are many other definitions out there, but when I think of historic preservation, I mean, that is so broad to me. But to boil it down, it is the act of recognizing and documenting a place of cultural or historic significance and actively participating to ensure that place remains for future generations.
Okay.
So there's kind of two sides to it. You have to actually think about, is this historic? If it is, document it. But then there's the active part of preservation, which is then how do you reuse it or show people that it's important to save, and how do you do that?
So there are all sorts of aspects, the documenting, the researching whether it's historic, and then I imagine somebody has to have skills of, preserving the building.
Right.
And then also a public advocacy side. So multifaceted.
Yeah, preservation is a process.
Mm-hmm.
I think people don't get how complex it is because of those three things, the recognizing, the documenting, and the saving part of it. And there are specialists and expertise in each of those areas, which have different professional certifications or educational backgrounds and ways that people find themselves coming into the field of preservation.
How did you find your way into preservation?
To me, it seems so natural. And I always loved architecture growing up as a kid. I was around carpentry and construction on my dad's side of the family. My dad's an engineer. And I thought about going to architecture school. At the end of the day, that was not where I decided to do things, but ended up taking a basic level historic preservation class in undergraduate, and just knew right then, this was the perfect mix of things I really liked and enjoyed, and to me just naturally was something that I understood.
How interesting. Thank you. So what are the preservation trends in Utah? What are the national trends? How do they compare?
Yeah, I think they're pretty similar, actually, national and local trends. And that's one thing I wanted to make sure to highlight as guest editor in this special issue. And I think we did that. There are threads that you see about what's happening in historic preservation nationally in this issue. For me, one of the big ones that we're working on is on inclusion and diversity. And as our nation's demographics change, so do the places that matter to people. There's really an evolution of community. What community is, who is that community, and recognizing those social, economic shifts, and how places play a role in that. Where places that served one purpose and then maybe served a second purpose might already be on their third purpose as the community changes and as our nation changes. So certainly inclusion and diversity is one of those. Another is really just this idea that history does not stop. I mean, as any historian knows, time doesn't stop. So our role in that is ever present. The way I talk about preservation is that it also happens along a time continuum that doesn't stop. So
I like that.
every year we begin to look at more recent places, recently built places, and ask the question, has this place become significant for some reason, and should it be recognized and saved? Not that long ago, I even remember this time with our organization, thinking about preserving a place that was built after World War II was completely radical. People did not get it. They say World War II, like if time stopped at World War II. Yeah. But of course, that's not the case. There are many other important events and trends and people that came after World War II, and architecture as well. Thinking now, 2020 is not that far off. We're only 3 years away from the year 2020, which means that buildings constructed in 1970, will reach the 50-year age mark. So we start to enter a new decade of the 1970s, and the importance of evaluating whether or not some of these places from that decade are significant. Yeah.
One of my coworkers, Lisa Buckmiller, before coming into the interview, she said, ask Kirk about mid-century modern, because it's so hot as a style right now. I mean, just my little knowledge on Pinterest, it's everywhere, right? It's the big deal. Yeah. So how does that affect, Lisa's question was, how does that affect other trends? I mean, does that make people, if one style is hot, then do other styles of building get devalued in popular imagination or something?
Yeah, with certainly as we see with architecture and especially in the piece of historic preservation that is the reuse or continued use of buildings, different styles of architecture have gone through this kind of boom and bust cycle where it's very popular, certainly when it's first built, and then it goes through a period of decline where no one appreciates it. It is unloved. It is the mutt of all architecture that people want to just get rid of, or ignore in some way. And in that way, it does become devalued. Yeah. But there's always a cycle that then comes back and says, this has value. And if we make appropriate changes, this is how we can continue reusing it. Yeah. Mid-century modern is in that kind of next boom cycle. It was big when it was first built. It went through a huge, devaluing, to use that term. But now is certainly on the rebound, and much of it is the inspiration for contemporary design that we see today. And that there's a lot of qualitative value of why those places were built the way they are, and the qualitative values that I think we see today with people making judgments about how they want to live.
That's interesting.
And so there's association from the 50s and 60s to today.
That is so interesting to me, the I guess palimpsest idea of buildings, that they have one use, two uses, three uses, and all of those uses are valuable, and you can look at it and think, oh, this is how it's going to be used now. Yeah. And I have a question for you about the inclusion and the diversity. Who's a community? So thinking as a historian, I'm always interested in transience, just the idea of transience, and I work amidst it here at the Rio Grande in the neighborhood here. And it's very hard to document historically. It's very hard for sources. So how, with groups that are more transient, that might have been on a lower economic rung, how do you find the buildings that they're a part of? I mean, if you want more inclusion and diversity, and people aren't stickers as much if they don't stick in a community as much if they don't have the means.
Yeah, I go back to one of the foremost planners
Uh-huh.
from my past, Kevin Lynch.
Uh-huh.
And he came up with a concept of geospatial relations that really makes sense with any group that you might call a community.
Yeah.
And if you use Kevin Lynch's principles, you can ask the question, where are the places that are important to you?
Mm-hmm.
And if you can have someone put on a piece of paper a map of what their world is,
Mm-hmm.
you will quickly get a visual of the places that are important to them. They may not be able to name them by name or name the streets and how to get there, but they know that this service is over here and it's next to,
Mm-hmm.
this landmark.
Mm-hmm.
And they know, that is 3 blocks away. Or if you're talking to a group of elementary school kids, you say, what makes up the important places of your community? And you can quickly get a visual from them talking about, well, I have a soccer game over here, so
Mm-hmm.
that park is really important to me. And, we go to church on Sunday, and my grandma lives 3 miles away in this
Mm-hmm.
direction. And that's the sort of Kevin Lynch principle of, well, what makes up your community? What are the places that are important? And then if you overlay all the different responses within that group, you may have repetitive answers.
That's
So
fascinating.
you really see that, the church is very important in this community, or the grocery store is important in this community. And you start to see how people gather and where people go. And to me, that just informs us that even though we may say, well, that's not a traditional historic building, it's not 50 years old, or it's not a great piece of architecture. No one important slept there, but it's important to that community.
This bodega matters to this neighborhood,
And you see,
and we save it.
yeah, and you see how it comes out in how people use it.
Yeah.
And so, part of it is that we need to just be out there as historians, architectural historians, learning from these communities about what is important to them.
That's very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thanks for
Yeah.
answering my question there. And that kind of gets into the next subject I wanted to talk to you about, which is our special issue, and we kind of dubbed it Places That Matter, and this is exactly what you're talking about, and you wrote an essay about sites of conscience. Tell our listeners, what are sites of conscience?
Well, this was a really important story for me to tell, and I'm really appreciative of the Utah State Historical Society and the Utah Historical Quarterly for allowing me to express it in the issue. Contrary to places that historic preservation often highlights, those of grand architecture, those with stories of self-made men, celebratory events and historical triumphs. Sites of conscience are different in that they are places that have some of their significance tied to a multi-layered history, that have difficult, misunderstood, tragic, or some sort of social injustice tied to them. So in the past, these have been places that have largely been ignored for that part of the story. Maybe there's a different side in that multi-layered history that's really been told. But the other parts are disregarded or not told in an equal way, though they may be known as part of the site, but they're not really presented as part of the site. And so this article really brings out some of those places, and to me, I'm arguing in the article that they should be preserved, so that just like the celebratory sites, we learn something from them about how we treat each other.
Good. You know, the one of the examples in your article that really it's very instructive are the slave cabins, and the of course outside of Utah, but the Joe McGill's slave cabin dwelling project, and staying in a slave cabin overnight and having that experience again is instructive. And often the grand mansions are celebrated, of course they're grand, but you have to something historians think a lot about, all of the work that underpinned it, and these folks living in very humble places. So that was such a good example, I thought, of a site of conscience. And tell us, sites of conscience in Utah.
Yeah, you know, and this is, I think, the important work of us as historians for the future, is to research and document these histories that aren't as present. And that's really difficult work.
It is.
But
it is.
Also really important.
Yeah.
And so, whereas we don't have slave cabins here, certainly we have a number of other sites. And some of the ones that I list in the article include the Utah State Penitentiary in Draper, which right now is actively being reconsidered for some sort of redevelopment. You know, the Topaz Japanese internment camp near Delta is one. The Salina CCC and POW camp, where the Salina massacre took place. Wendover Airfield for its association with the Enola Gay bomber and the bombing of Japan in World War II. And the Lion House in Salt Lake City for its association with polygamy.
Yeah. And so the thought is, if those sites are preserved and interpreted, then visitors can have a different experience with history. And again, a contemplative experience, thinking, how do we treat one another?
I liked your word there. The contemplation part of it, I think, is also important, because really what we see is people wanting to have this deeper experience, to know that this place has meaning, and to be able to reflect on your own life, your own personal choices, when thinking about the people that came before you who were part of what happened there. It creates that experience.
And what goes into preserving a site of conscience? You said you have to identify the most important elements that make this a place, a thing. So I guess you do that through documentation? Right.
And I think it is a little different, and even for me as an architectural historian, it takes a different level of thinking, because it's not as natural based on my training and my background, which usually goes right to architecture.
Yeah.
And and then it adds layers of events and social history and things like that. But to really consider that possibly the primary significance of a site is something that's not tangible. It gives us, I think, a new challenge in preservation, because you're not able to point at something and say, see that? It's more something that has to be evoked and brought out in stories and interpreted in a different way. And that's when interpretation and the research become foremost for a site.
Yeah, and would you work with professionals in other fields then to do all it? Just thinking, do you include art and poetry as part of that if it's going to be an evocative experience? Yeah,
absolutely. I think there are artistic expressions that are overlaid, that become part of that interpretation or that experience. Certainly discussion, I think, becomes important. So elements of the humanities start to come out. where we really want to have a rich discussion about what happened here and why is it important, and what can we take away from that, from what happened in the past and relate it to what's happening today.
Well, among these sites in Utah, don't I guess not a favorite, but what's really on your mind for these?
Well, mostly I think it is the prison in Draper.
Tell me why.
And well, it's because it's the most active
Yeah.
at this point. Many wonderful things in terms of active preservation have happened at the other places. And I think you can have some of this experience at any of those, except for Draper right now.
Yeah.
So, recognizing that really there's nothing left of the first Utah State Penitentiary at Sugar House Park.
Right.
So we have the ability now to keep something there at Draper in terms of the physical place and be able to use it in interpretation. And various groups have been bringing this up, local groups, the State Historic Preservation Office, our organization, are starting to ask the question about, how should this happen, and seeing how it goes. We don't have a definitive answer at this point for yes, something should be saved, or no, it is an ongoing conversation. But it's out there.
It's out there. Thank you. Thanks. Let's switch gears. One of our questions we wanted to ask is, and it's something we deal with in the Historical Society and that we're learning, is about the model for an organization. That we're obviously all in a new environment of social media, and people of my generation, and certainly millennials younger than me, don't buy memberships. Don't buy memberships. So what do you do as the head of an organization? How do you adapt to the new environment?
Yeah, it is a challenge,
Yeah.
definitely, and recognizing how important membership is to both of our organizations.
Yes, it is important.
Right, and to us, it's always been important as part of our program's budget, because it allows us to do some things.
It does.
But also in terms of advocacy, it's important because we know that those are our insiders. Those are the people that know
Right.
us best.
Right.
They appreciate us enough to write us a check or make a donation. So we want to treat them like our insiders.
Right.
And the challenge of bringing in a new audience has always been there. It's different now. And we've heard conflicting data on millennials. Maybe you guys have too. Are they joiners? Are they not joiners?
Yeah.
And I think where we're at is thinking that what we consistently know is that millennials are investing in their community,
Absolutely.
but in different ways
Yeah.
than past generations.
That's our experience.
And they seem very willing to invest their time and their expertise, maybe more than their money. They want to preserve flexibility in spending, I think is what we see. Certainly they don't have as much.
Yeah.
And they, certainly in Utah, people in their 20s are often not single anymore.
Yes.
They do have young families.
So it creates challenges in the budget.
It does.
Yeah.
And so, membership does not rise up, for organizations in that way. But we do see that the trend with younger generations is that they do give to causes, but they like to give when it's more immediate and impactful at the moment.
Yes.
And so I think that's part of our challenge is thinking about sort of our social media environment and how things can happen so quickly, and how as a society we need to be part of that, knowing that millennials want to make a difference.
Absolutely.
I see our job as opening as many doors as we can for younger people, including millennials, to step through. And sometimes that means new programs or more small additions that might really be targeting that audience to an existing program. But we need to make it easy for them and show them how their participation, no matter how small, can make a difference to the community and give them a deeper connection. Yeah. And I think if we can do that, they'll choose to take part.
Yes, our experience as millennials, they have so much to add. They're so smart and connected, and we're always seeking opportunities to bring them in our door also, because it only improves things.
Yeah. And it's gotten me really thinking about our roles as staff. And oftentimes we think about a staff role as public outreach. But oftentimes what we, and that's kind of a communication from inside out. But I think oftentimes what we more need is, I don't know if we'd call it public inreach, but we need someone that's out all the time pushing things back in. And it may not be the same person always doing that.
Being 11 to the organization.
Yeah. And so, we need the person that's at the networking event at the Salt Lake City Impact Hub.
Yeah.
Because that's where you're going to meet that next generation of difference makers. And bring back those connections from the community. And you need to be at X meeting and Y meeting and Z meeting that, and if you're out all the time, you'll start to get a picture of who some people are that can come into the organization and start to make that difference, because they're smart, and we got to just find the right people that want to be part of what we're doing.
Thank
but
you.
It's a huge challenge.
It's a huge challenge.
It is.
Was that why Preservation Utah recently rebranded from Utah Heritage
Foundation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of the logo in my mind, Utah Heritage Foundation. Thanks. And to Preservation Utah. What was the reasoning behind that?
Yeah. I wouldn't say it was an image crisis.
No.
Or anything
Not
like
at
that.
all. Not at all.
I think we would have been fine just trucking along with,
I liked it.
with the same name. And the idea of our name and what the name communicates had come up a couple of times while I've been at the organization, and I think even before I got there. So it was something that was recurring. And, if something kind of bubbles up every once in a while, maybe you should really try to address it, was what I was thinking. But, we had a tremendous opportunity in 2016 with our 50th anniversary to really consider in a very strategic way how we talked about ourselves and our work. We did some strategic planning in 2015, knowing that we were moving into our 50th anniversary year. And so we asked the question to some focus groups about what our name conveyed to people and what feelings they got from our name. And what we got back from them was that there was really no attachment to our name, that it often led to confusion about who we are and what we do, and whether we were part of government or some other national organization.
I can see that.
So it expressed no independence
Yeah.
as a nonprofit organization. And so we felt we were granted express permission with a please to change the name.
Yeah.
We just had to figure out how to do that. And of course, with the name change, rebranding only seemed appropriate as well.
Wow, it's nice.
So thank you. It has been going well, and it seems to be very well received. And I think really it follows more of a national trend as well for rebranding, certainly in our profession. What we call our work in the United States is historic preservation. And so that word hopefully goes directly to that, in a very quick way. So I do want to say, we really appreciate the support of the George S. and Dolores Dory Eccles Foundation, who provided support, not only financial support, but visionary support to really sort of push us and say, you guys should think more broadly about kind of where we're going here. And so, to really have a leader in conservation and preservation in Utah, like the Eccles Foundation, is such a tremendous asset for all of us.
It is. One final question: the Preservation Utah is a nonprofit. How can a nonprofit do things in the world of preservation that a SHPO office can't? And SHPO is State Historic Preservation Office. What can you all do that this SHP can't? This shop.
This office, yeah.
Yeah, this office.
I should say that we really enjoy a tremendous collaborative partnership with our State Preservation Office. Not every state can say that for working with their local nonprofits, but really through all the state preservation officers that have been here and the staff, we really figure out how to make it work so that we don't have to repeat the same programs, and therefore we can really focus on our strengths and what makes us different. And to me is that ability to advocate. So that is the biggest difference, and to me has the potential to make the most difference is because we can be out there really pushing people and telling them, you have to save this. This is so important. Lobbying elected officials, participating in the writing of ordinances if that needed to happen. So that's really the biggest difference between a government agency and the nonprofit organization is that we can take that strong advocate role. But on the other hand, we don't have to do a lot of the documentation. The State Preservation Office really takes the lead in the documentation part of it. And so we are a good balance for each other. And as an organization founded as Utah Heritage Foundation in the 60s, we were a grassroots advocacy organization to save historic places. So I feel very strongly that that's a centerpiece of where Preservation Utah goes for the next 50 years as well.
Is advocacy.
Yeah.
It gets back to where we started, that there are different specialties because it's such a complex process.
Right, exactly. And we need, people to help do that, whether you're individuals or you're part of a local organization. You might be part of a local preservation commission or a nonprofit, and all of those levels really make a difference in that complex process.
One final question, postscript. Let's just make an argument for why even preserve a place. Why preserve a building?
Well, I think it gets back to, you could run down 20 reasons.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
There really are. But to me, it gets back to why do we want to be in a place? And to me, it seems more authentic and natural to me to be in a place that has some level of comfort to it. Like, hey, this place is established. It's not going to go away. And there is a story here that people have created in our places, and that these kind of rambling on this one, but
No.
it is hard to define because it's to me it's about the environment and sustaining a good environment. It's about the health of our communities, both mental health and walkable communities, physical health. It's about a good economy because historic buildings and rehabilitation of buildings have proven to generate more income than many industries in the state. It's about appreciation of our history and pride in a community that comes from knowing who your ancestors were, who came before you, how hard they worked, and what they created. And then being able to figure out how you might be playing a role in something that someone looks at 50 years from now, and judging, wow, this is really important. You know, what they did back then really makes a difference for us now.
I like that.
So I just got right to the bulleted list.
I like the bulleted list. Well, thank you so much for coming by, and excited to have the issue come out.
Yeah, you're welcome, and I really do appreciate all that UHQ has done, and I'm excited to have the issue come out as well.
Good, thank you.